Hi everyone, welcome to my review of f.w.murnau's Nosferatu in 1922. So, another film that's on my favourite films list, my 500 favourite films, and here it is. This is the Masters of Cinema Blu-ray Steelbook, and just look at this, the expressionist style is still maintained. The back is awful, very, very plain, and just inside very good as well. And this film, it's a film that I've seen 3 times now. And yes, it's one of the first, actually one of the first steelbooks I got, and I'd say it's the first Master of Cinema I've got actually. And yes, back in 2014 I got this. It was on Sky I think around about time, but I just thought the score was different. I believe it was just really really off-putting, and I just thought and I watched some of it and I just thought no, I'll wait for the Blu-ray, I'll get it on that, and it did not disappoint. I saw many as a kid, quite a lot of silent films, shorts mainly, and this, you could say that this is one of the first 5 feature silents I saw. It was back in 2014. I was really starting to seek out these films more, and I just thought this one always intrigued me. My granddad talked about it quite a lot, mentioned it and said it was a great film and everything, one of his favourite horrors, and I really always loved the classic horrors more, all the way up until really the 80s, and stuff, and some great ones in the 80s, but really after that, or late 80s at least, started petering out and becoming, very, very, all the slasher stuff came in more, and just the horror genre kind of petered out, and it's never really fully recovered to the standards really of classic horrors, and this one, of course, f.w. Murnau, of course this is the first, first kind of adaptation of Dracula, of the novel, Bram Stoker's, and it is really the unauthorized one. It wasn't actually, there's many issues with copyright and all that kind of stuff, but really, after that, it became quite quickly regarded as a masterpiece, and it's usually on lists of best horror films, if not just best films of all time, and I agree, it's a masterpiece, no doubt. It's a spoiler, and f.w. Murnau, this is the first one I saw, of course. Then I did, of course, the only one I've seen of him, of his films, is of course Sunrise, and I'll be reviewing that at some point, rewatching a review. I saw that this year, and yes, wow. Let me tell you, I will not reveal my full thoughts on that. Wait for the review on that, but something else, that film. And of course, as well, after that, I picked up all these. Some of them still sealed. City Girl, it was kind of taboo, and then there's a set as well, which I really am anticipating checking out. I think a few of his films got lost, and unfortunately passed in 1931. He could have gone on to make some more great films, of course. Really, it seems like shaping up, and from what I can feel, and from these 2 films, it feels like it could be one of my absolute favourite directors. Once I see all of his films, and I just cannot wait, because this guy, was a master of direction, and these 2 films, and especially Sunrise, actually, are just remarkable pieces of cinema. This film is basically, of course, it follows the kind of the main story of Dracula. A couple of things have changed here and there. It's a different take to say Bram Stoker's, Dracula by Coppola. But it is basically, Thomas Hutter is basically Jonathan Harker, and of course Count Orlok is basically Count Dracula, and many of the things play out kind of similar, as in he's wanting to kind of in this one basically you've got Count Orlok wants to seek out buy a place basically where in this town, and he has his castle, which is very similar, of course, and basically this character Thomas Hutter is sent by his employer, to kind of bring this guy Count Orlok, kind of offer him the place, and basically bring it all together and kind of sort that out and make the deal, and he stays in his castle at first as well, and that's the first bits are see him at his home and stuff, and then he travels, of course, to the castle, and then he basically realises what this guy is, a vampire, and after that, of course, it's the travel back, the ship sequence, and of course everything that happens, in the final acts. And it's split into kind of five, distinct acts, and it kind of comes up with that. It is very much like that, but it has such a flow to it, and all the acts on their own are really perfect. I think this is just a flawless film, really. I love silent films. I absolutely. I think I agree with the fact that basically the majority of the cinematic language, is now majority of it was achieved within these, silent period, and you've got my favourite films really, even when they're not silent, are actually the ones that really take advantage of the visual storytelling that they can do. And really my favourite moments in cinema are usually always the ones that don't have dialogue, the use of music, or or maybe battle scenes, for example, or something like that. Ones that don't require dialogue. Days of Heaven, I think, is a perfect example of that. Really, the whole film is like this epic poem, a visual poem, but it's not a lot of dialogue. And there's many films that do this perfectly. And yeah, I just think silent films. There was moments where almost the heights of the absolute height of cinema was achieved. Example, City Lights, and this is this is not quite on that level. But this film, is absolutely stunning. It's not just a horror film as well. It really is. It's a romance, beautiful romance, and it's just a lovely film, really. The kind of his wife Ellen, beginning of the film, you kind of see them, in the first 10 minutes or so, and just their kind of their love for one another, and it's really uplifting and just beautiful, pure cinema, and this silent period. And what once it kicked in, what it kind of showed, it was just pure cinematics and all that kind of stuff, and the stuff that really can give you these feels, and just perfectly filmmakers perfectly getting across what they want to say just through visual storytelling, and so many great soundtracks, scores back then, which is wonderful, kind of just beautiful elevational, kind of scores, and the score to this film is wonderful. It's just absolutely wonderful. It's basically all restored, I believe, on this kind of restoration. I believe this is 2012 or 2013 restoration that this one comes with, and it's absolutely wonderful. The cinematography in this film is something else. I think the way that Murnau captured landscapes and just nature in general, and as well, German expressionism is really interesting, and I think it really works perfectly for horror films, because horror films, when they're at their best, are ones that that really deal with atmosphere, tension of course as well, but psychological stuff, and atmosphere, and it's perfect, the kind of unsettling angles that were prevalent, and the exaggerated sets, and stuff that German expressionism kind of dealt with. And this is when Murnau was making films in Germany. Of course, in 26 he would move to Hollywood and make of course Sunrise, and a couple of other films after that. One of them was Lost, I believe, and it just worked perfectly, because all the unsettling angles as well, and all that kind of just works so well to give you the atmosphere and the creepiness, and just the kind of just the weird feel that this film has, and it works perfectly for this story, and on this occasion as well, the characters are all working in harmony to this, and it's just such a perfect mold. I think Max Schreck as Count Orlok is masterful in this film. Really, what a performance, and of course, as I say, it does kind of basically in very bare bones effects follow the story of say what you've seen in Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Coppola version, and there's loads of things that don't play out the same, but it is basically the similar sort of story, and I love, of course, it's just a classic story, Dracula, and I've seen quite a few versions now, of course. I've reviewed quite a few on my channel now, and I think this one is probably the best. I can probably say that the first is still the best, the finest for sure. But I may prefer the Bram Stoker one. The Coppola version. It's very close. Certainly after rewatching that one, last month or so, it really was even better than I remembered. And it's very, very close in preference. But this one I think is the one really without any flaws. It's not got any flaws really, this one. The Bram Stoker one had a couple here and there, although it was still close to a masterpiece. This one is just one that's the purest, the finest, I would say. And it kind of it deals mostly with the atmosphere and everything, of course. And it's just really interesting to see, how different it is, but also the kind of the essential stuff that happens within the story of Dracula is portrayed here. And this is very different as well. Max Schreck, the performance is very. At times, you kind of feel quite sorry for this character. It's very peculiar kind of, peculiar character, and it's not just he's not just a monster and stuff. There's a lot of humanity that's kind of added to the character, and you kind of feel sorry for him, and the way that he's portrayed. Wonderful performance, very, very layered, and just his stance, his glances and the kind of elongated glances that he gives. The makeup just adds to this as well. The kind of exaggerated makeup and costumes all add perfectly to this film. And it just, I think something about silent films as well, where the eye makeup and stuff, it kind of makes it more scary. I feel, it really does, especially with this. You just, when you see his eyes, especially even from a distance, it really stands out, and it gives you that weird effect, unsettling effect. And I just think that works perfectly in this film, and it is a really scary film. Many have called it. Now people say it's not scary. I do believe it is, and they're not jump scares, because of course they didn't really do that back then, which is great. That's why I prefer a lot of classic horror films. But it is scary in the way that it sticks with you, and all the images are really, really unsettling, and have a long-lasting effect of scariness on you, and the sense of dread and the atmosphere that's built up is masterful. And I just think the characters in this film are great as well. The character of Hutter, who's basically Jonathan Harker, he probably is the best kind of rendition of the Jonathan character that we've had, really, and because the Terence Fisher one that I saw in the 50s, he was probably the weakest part about that film, the character of Jonathan, and he wasn't really in it too much. Of course, Keanu Reeves, not the best of performances, in the Coppola version. That was one of my really only flaws that I had with the film. And in this one, really, I really, really like this character. I think he was really, really good. Kind of rooted for him, and as well, when you see him with the woman at the beginning, Ellen, it's wonderful, and that kind of drives the film as well. It's so beautiful, it's just so pure, the way that this is portrayed very early on. It's kind of like a crash course for Sunrise in many aspects, but the romance is wonderful, and this character is a very jolly character, and it's quite funny to see a very, very jolly character at first, and kind of jumping around and stuff. It's just it's very joyous at the beginning, and that's wonderful. Very uplifting stuff, and he's also quite a an innocent character, and just likable, I feel, and you root for him. At least I did, and then as well, I really felt a lot for this Count Orlok, and very, very. I love the peaceful kind of scenes in the castle and in the inn as well, when the classic kind of he visits the inn and everyone kind of says don't go to the castle and stuff, and classic kind of sense of foreshadowing and stuff there. Of course, another thing that is still here is the werewolf, although not as you'd see it in the Coppola version. I'm not going to ruin what it actually is in the film, but it's more symbolic really than anything. But the whole bit, at the beginning, before he gets to the castle, is so perfect. It's unbelievable. Perfectly, the flow of it, and just the way that builds the atmosphere. And then when you do reach, the castle, it's very, very, you can't, it's very, very unsettling, and it lives up to, basically to kind of how people have described it. And then you see, of course, Count Orlok, and it does not disappoint. Some of the most iconic scenes in horror films are here. When it's just as well. It's very, very simple in the way that he stands in doorways and stuff, and that's all he needs to do. And then he's one of the most iconic characters. in horror films. A perfect performance, and of course, all the other performances, the side characters are great. The character of Hutter, Thomas Hutter, he's really great in this film. And the character of Knock, who is, basically, he's the one that, you see in the films that always goes insane, like in the Coppola version. And he's the one that adds a lot of, madness as well to it all. And that's great. And I love the kind of subplots that go on with him, the way he's captured and everything. That's great. And, you've got some thrilling chase scenes as well. This film really has everything for a horror film. I think it's one of the finest horror films ever made, actually. It is really flawless for me. And every act is really just stunning. The one on the ship as well, quite tragic in its own right. And I think the way that Murnau portrays this character of Count Orlok is just perfect. And the performance is wonderful, and it's got a very, very spiritual feel. The way that the wife is always, once he's left, she's always wanting him back and stuff, and the sense of longing, portrays that perfectly, and I think is really, really touching stuff. And it's just really, really a pure representation of life, as well as one of the most chilling horror films. I think overall this film is a masterpiece. Doesn't quite, again, get into my plus tiers, but you could say in its own way it's just as good as a horror film as Alien, that I reviewed yesterday. If not a better film, it's just that good, and it's just wonderful film. I'd have to give this 100%. Flawless masterpiece from me. Doesn't quite get into my plus tiers, but it's a really special film. This is wonderful. I definitely recommend getting the steelbook. It's just amazing. Great one for my collection as well. Spine number 70 of the Masters of Cinema. And yeah, it's just a stunning film from start to finish. I absolutely loved it. Quite a short film, but it still manages to be very, very big in scope, and it covers the adventure feel that it has at first, and then the impending the sense of dread that kind of builds and builds until that final climax, which is really, really just kind of shiver-worthy, I would describe it as. Really gave me goosebumps. It's and just visually, this film, the way that Murnau tells his story, is masterful. Every element, the editing as well, is stunning. The way juxtaposes certain images, for kind of not just visual effects, but also to kind of imply different things there. It's just wonderful. It's so layered. Just all the cinematography throughout this film is wonderful. It's very, very pure, and the framing is just perfect. The performances are wonderful, and it has, it really portrays as well the kind of plague that happens in it perfectly. This kind of, it has all the personal stuff as well, but it also has quite a big scale, and it covers just everything really that is necessary, almost everything that's necessary for the story. I think as well it's great to see the Bram Stoker version, Coppola's version, that adds many different things, and it's I think at the moment I may prefer that, but this one's probably the finest Dracula that I've seen, the one without any flaws, and the one that is just really the purest of that, this kind of story. And just at the moment, well, I wouldn't say it's one of the absolute best silence I've seen, because I've just seen so many great ones, but it is a perfect film for me, and fairly high on my favourite films list. So yeah, thanks for watching my review of Nosferatu, and who knows, very, very soon I might properly get into these other Murnau's that I've got here. City Goat I really look forward to the most, actually, of the ones I've not seen. Yes, Murnau, from what I've seen, he was a master, and I'm not ruling out him climbing even higher on my favourite directors list. It was really remarkable, and apart from Chaplin, he may shape up to be my favourite silent director. So yeah, there we go. Thanks for watching my review of f.w. Murnau's absolute masterpiece, Nosferatu.